All right, hello and welcome to the Unnameable TRPG podcast. I'm Jay Underwood,
I'm Chris.
And I'm Sandra Rosner.
and welcome to the podcast, Sandra. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Why don't you tell the listeners about what you do and what you can bring to the table? What is your RPG background? What are your interests, hobbies, etc.?
By day I am a novelist, lore writer, and developmental editor. Also the author of World of Warcraft, the Dragonflight Codex, and RuneScape, the official cookbook.
And by night, you moonlight as a podcaster slash RPG player extraordinaire. Yes.
Absolutely, all night, every night. Though I do also stream on Twitch as Lady Von Frost, so quite a busy schedule.
Well, today's topics include good soundtracks and using music in your RPG session, conflict resolution mechanics, and theater of the mind versus tactical battle mats slash the tactical game.
Part one of many, I'm sure.
Part one of many. We will definitely revisit these topics. So let's just jump right into it and talking with soundtracks, how to use them, what to use, some good ideas for future GMs in order in which they can take soundtracks and use them in perhaps more particular ways. Chris, any ideas?
Well, I think that we talked about opening themes. It's a good way to start a session so that you let the players know that it's game time. We're no longer talking about our weekends or what the newest video game you're into. We're playing now. So often I will start my sessions with a song, maybe a song that I've used multiple times, and just let them know that okay, we're in now. Other times, it's a good way to build tension in a scene, of course, right? That's one of the big ways of using it. But also to, let players know to relax sometimes. Because you don't want them to be high strung the entire time. You'll play a nice a nice melody to let them know that okay, this area is safe and they can actually talk with each other.
So you're saying using soundtracks as a sort of functional use in order to indicate that the start of a session or the ending of a session or something like that.
Yes. It's a good indicator for certain things.
I know my regular weekly groups, we have a tendency to get a little bit zany before the sessions and using a soundtrack in order to sort of calibrate everyone or sort of calm the room down and to get them into that sort of the headspace of gaming is really useful.
I can definitely say that I appreciate soundtracks that build tension and break tension. Where, as we transition from one scene to the next, you keep the, either your fellow players or if you're DMing the players at your table, when you throw that kind of surprise, like from a scene wise or a character wise, and then you can throw the music that matches that villain that you've been, having in the background, they haven't shown up in a while, and then all of a sudden you play their theme song, the energy around the table just goes insane.
Yeah, kind of having a sort of tonal audio palette for a region of the world that they're in, such that if they're in the desert region of the world, you're using a lot of soundtracks that kind of indicate that type of sound or whatever area that you're in, so players begin to associate certain villages or certain landmarks, and in addition to NPC characters and villains with their themes, such that prior to any sort of narrative description of the place, you could simply put on the soundtrack and they will indicate, oh, now we're here.
Yep.
But that does require a good deal of prep and sort of intentionality with the soundtracks that you're going to use. But yes, it can be definitely very effective. I know, Chris, that you've actually used soundtracks in such a way that you've had players give to you what they want their soundtrack to be, their theme to be.
Multiple times. I've sometimes asked them for a normal theme, but also a battle theme as well. So when they're doing something incredible, right, then I can I have that queued up, and then it's their time to shine, really. So.
And are there any particular soundtracks out there that you would really recommend listeners go to and to use if they haven't used them for some time?
Well, for me, I try to stay away from music that maybe my players can recognize.
Like
Because I can often,
The Star Wars
yeah,
theme
Oh,
or something.
absolutely.
okay, yeah, right. Like it can really break you it can really break you out of the out of the moment if you break the illusion. if suddenly you hear the Indiana Jones theme and you're like, oh, then you start thinking about Indiana Jones instead of what's happening at the table.
Well, to not to go on a tangent, but there has been something of a shift in the way film music composers compose the soundtracks for film, and it's sort of a blessing and a curse. Old soundtracks from the '90s and the '80s all have a lot of sort of thematic color to them compared to now. And while a lot of soundtracks nowadays still have some great memorable themes, a lot of these underscore for the rest of the movie tends to be a lot more kind of ambient, kind of droning color, which is really good for RPG because now you don't have to worry about having some music that's too kind of
Yeah.
active to have a talking scene over. And you also want a piece of music that lasts at least 4 to 5 minutes, rather than a minute 30 track that repeats over and over again that they're sick of it in 5 minutes. You've already listened to it 5 times. So in a sense, a lot of the modern soundtracks are good for that reason. In addition, anyone who uses YouTube for their scores might think to do a search for whatever soundtrack they're looking for, say Dune or uh, Conan or something like that, and then followed by the word extended. And there's been a great many of YouTube champions out there who take the themes that they really like, say The Shape of Water, and then extend it out to a 2 to/3 hour extended cut and put it up on YouTube. So then you don't have to worry about having to like restart the track every 5 minutes when it repeats, which is really, really useful.
I've stayed away from trying to use YouTube because I don't have the premium, so it keeps on throwing commercials in between, and I can't deal with that.
I could throw in that there's a lot of amazing composers out again on YouTube, um, but you don't necessarily have to block yourself into things that could be, as you warned, recognizable by your players. If you just do general searches, like if you know you're doing an epic battle, the more search terms you put into YouTube, the more fine tuned you can find these up and coming composers that would love to have your views, to keep building their channels and whatnot. A lot of writers that I know do exactly this. So we wind up swapping playlists, and we find out, oh no, that was actually being used by our DM in their campaign. Oh, that's really cool. That really matches a scene I'm writing. So there's a lot of crossover here about building our playlists from these type of composers because they're doing some really incredible stuff that isn't too intense. So just like in a campaign, you don't want your players to just almost get interrupted by the music. Same thing with writing. You want to have a nice smooth progression to what you're doing and not have too many highs and lows as you're concentrating.
Cross-pollination of idea space is really necessary, isn't it, in a sense? Um, so finding a top 10 list of like the best or even most disappointing games of 2024 or something like that. And maybe you've not played all of these games, but looking into the soundtracks of these games might kind of lead to a discovery of something that's sort of new and exciting. And even during, as you mentioned briefly, the writing process of it, throwing on a soundtrack that you are unfamiliar with might help to stimulate some ideas in the kind of creative end before the gameplay has even begun.
Absolutely.
Ooh, do you have any suggestions for some really good soundtracks? Like, say ones that you've used that have really been effective.
Yeah, as for soundtracks that I really like, I tend to go back to the well of the soundtrack to the movie Perfume, which I think has everything in it. It has suspense, it's got mystery, it's got action, it's got exploration elements to it, and it's unrecognizable to players as for a theme that is as familiar as say Indiana Jones or something like that, but the thematic material that's in there is incredibly memorable and evocative. How about you?
Oh, for me, I'm really big into the Evangelion stuff and also the Elden Ring music.
Mm,
Like, if you sit down and just like listen to the soundtrack, that even during prep, it just fuels your imagination.
Yeah, the Elden Ring scores and Dark Souls scores are incredibly epic.
Oh, and of course, we can't go at like one of these discussions without talking about Oblivion. I've heard that music. I've heard that music everywhere, on streams, on just everywhere.
The soundtracks of Jeremy Soule are gracing the tables of RPG gamers all around the world, I think, since the 90s.
Guild Wars 2 for sure.
Yep.
That is constantly playing.
Sandra, have there been any soundtracks in our gaming sessions that have been kind of standouts to you, or something that has been a memorable moment?
So a good example that comes to mind is Perfume. You've already set up our group to have that like rush of adrenaline whenever we hear that, because we know that a very specific element's about to take place in the campaign. So that soundtrack has actually wormed its way into other soundtracks that I have, because as soon as I need to evoke that feeling, those songs have carried from the campaign out into my own work. So 100%, if you need that kind of mystical, something magical is about to happen, something eerie is about to happen, that is the soundtrack.
Yeah, and back from our high school days of gaming, one of our big bad villain characters would always come into play with the little known but very evocative soundtrack by Hans Zimmer called Paper House,
Paper
which
House.
people should look into. It's very, very interesting and really good for a sort of sinister villain type. Okay, that sounds like pretty much like a wrap up. Let us move on to section B.
Well, welcome back. We're heading into our second topic, which is going to be conflict resolution mechanics. Now, this can involve not just character versus character, but also player versus player. And I'm quite interested to hear how our resident DM handled both in their campaigns.
When
Chris.
drama spills out from over the table.
Absolutely. It's bound to happen, especially in the best of stories. You're going to get highly invested. So,
Okay.
if you can give us an example from your own campaigns, obviously anonymous, we don't have to involve names, but.
We will name names.
Oh, names are coming out.
Names will be named.
There will be names. Well, we've had a few conflicts in the past with like players not meshing well with players, and at certain points you do have to step in and say, okay, maybe this isn't working, right? Like there are some problems that cannot be solved. You can't play to everyone's desires or everyone's motivations. I've had situations where players have built characters with the intention of killing another character, and I've had to step in and say, well, okay, we can't be doing this, and that ended kind of like a fairly long relationship that I had with one of my players.
I've heard stories like that before.
Yeah, buy-in becomes incredibly important in this regard. Do the players around the table all know that you're setting up to play a horror story, a kind of hero fantasy story, a power fantasy story? What is the buy-in? And still, that doesn't always mesh well.
I think a good amount of attention needs to be paid to like speaking with making sure that communication is important. Communication is important when it comes to uh, handling like these kind of situations. You always need to remember that we're all human. Uh, I think being sympathetic and or being empathetic, it's a very useful thing for DMs, just to make sure that I don't like to hurt anyone really.
Everyone's there to have a good time. The problem tends to happen when, because of the very nature of role playing, it is a heightened state of drama. Everyone is invested in the
Personal.
storyline, and it's oftentimes very personal. In which case that can tend to spill out. In which case, just having a frank and honest conversation after the fact can tend to resolve things just on the human level, as you say. Yeah.
As a player, I would probably say that assuming that you're with a group that you trust, and that's a huge component. If you trust the players that you're with and you trust the DM to hear you out, listen to what you're looking to do with your character and how that fits into the campaign, I think pretty much all things are possible. but you also have to know your character inside and out. So if you hit a moment where you just know that you're going to be at odds with another player at the table, I think that there's a space outside of the game in which you can have a talk with your DM, with the other player, and say, "Hey, can we see where this goes?" And so that everyone's on the same page and they can explore that journey together. But if it comes out of nowhere, if it's like, "Oh no, I want to sneak attack, kill this person at the table," absolutely, that is not the way forward. No matter how well you think your character is, it just has to mesh with we're playing this game with each other. It's not just one fantasy being played out at the expense of everyone else.
And as you mentioned, as you suggest, having a moment where you can sort of pause even mid-game to discuss, okay, I feel like we're getting to a moment here where sort of inter-party conflict is about to occur, or even like a romantic situation might even occur. Situations where players may be sort of uncomfortable over the table. I know it's been somewhat controversial among some tables, but games like Alice is Missing have brought in literal game mechanics in the with a X card,
Mhm.
such that a player can kind of non-verbally simply flash the card in order to indicate that the situation is moving into an uncomfortable territory, where in the drama or like particular scenes in like a horror setting might you know for lack of a better word, trigger some players, and therefore that should be best avoided.
Absolutely. Even in our we play a large number of sessions in a year compared to the average. And even amongst our group, we've had two X card moments. And they were just very calm, like, "Hey, you know what? I'm not going there with that." And everybody was completely supportive and moved along from that topic. And it's things you don't normally expect. There's the big ones that you would think of, especially if you have female players around the table. But
Mhm.
there's things that just are very suddenly like, uh, I play with somebody who is incredibly, incredibly phobic of spiders. They will not play with spiders in their campaign. It will ruin the immersion. It will ruin their time. You just can't. You can't do it. So, being able to trust that if something does start to really ruin your night and bring up feelings that you don't want to be experiencing in your downtime, knowing that the group is not going to make fun of you, that they're going to highly support you, it's really, really important.
I've sort of put a ban on alcohol
Mm,
during our games, ever since an incident that we had in Japan.
interesting.
The madness.
The madness, known as the madness. Perhaps one day
Collectively,
we will get into that a little bit more, but in
a
the
segment
podcast.
of GM horror stories. Yes, indeed. I do want to get into sort of the actual gaming conflict mechanics. The most common of which is simply a die roll, having a target number that you should beat. Others can be using a deck of cards. Maybe people don't think about that. There are a lot of games that use them. Some of them bake in the deck of cards with the settings, such as a kind of Wild West or kind of cowboy like setting where the cards are the way to resolve combat or moments in which you need some sort of resolution. And so you could use the 50-50. Is it a black suit? Is it a red suit to indicate a pass fail? You could do the same thing. Is it over a 6 or over a 7 on the suit? Or does a face card indicate some other effect that may be happening? Any other resolution mechanics that you might want to add?
Conflict resolution mechanics. I actually
Yes.
thought it was almost like a different topic in general. Like I was thinking about ways for a conflict to resolve instead of just you know beating up the bad guy, beating him to a pulp, pretty much. Uh,
Rather than just being murder hobos.
yeah,
I see.
exactly. Yeah. So like of course there are like alternate resolutions. So finding ways to to speak with the convince the big bad to step down,
Mhm.
right? Something
Mhm.
like that. but also like a clock or timed mechanics, or of course the room is flooding. You can only do so much in so much time, or I don't know, the red moon is about to rise, and once that happens, all hell will break loose. Or objectives, like things that like they need to complete before, or like you can't harm the big bad, but once you defeat his three minions, then of course all's all's fair.
Or
Um,
his three power orbs that are keeping
or
him
power orbs,
supplied or
or
whatever it may be.
lanterns, you know, uh, or you gotta erase, or you gotta scratch out the ritual circle to stop the horrible demon from being summoned. Those kind of things.
And indicating to the group in the moment during the session what are these ticking clock elements, and
Yeah,
having some visual means in which to represent that, so that players around the table can see, things are getting close. We've only got to turn left before the spikes come in and skewer us all or something like that.
mechanic from actually. Have you ever played 13 Age?
Yes.
Mhm.
They have something called an escalation dice, I believe.
Hmm.
And like every round, there's like you turn the dice over. It'll start at 1 after the first round, and after that, every hit becomes more dangerous. It becomes one more, and that just keeps on mounting up. I think up until 6, where you'll be doing like 6 extra damage for every attack, uh, for every round after that, right? So meaning that eventually someone's gonna fall, right?
Mhm.
Speeds combat along and stops things from coming into like a slog where you just got
Yeah,
two
yeah.
people just like
Because
punching
otherwise
each
it
other
just
in the
it just
face.
gets ridiculous. It's just like a bloodbath, right?
Yeah, Sandra, any ideas?
This is a bit like taking a slight turn from where your mindset was, but I think we'd be really remiss if we don't talk about uh, split campaign. You've got either you've brought your elements to this point, and your players are differing in how they want to tackle that problem. Uh, if there's the avenue in which to let them work that out, or perhaps their paths are taking different directions at that point. The thought that comes to mind with this in particular was a session we had, God, what is about 2.5 years ago, where we were literally having to decide whether or not to kill a party member because it was part of the story. They chose a completely different path from where we thought the campaign was going, and two players at the table had to argue about not killing the third one. And it's a very risky thing to do because obviously we've spoken to the difficulty of maintaining, friendships in those kind of environments. But it created a really interesting take on the story that I don't think any of us would have expected. Spoiler, the player was not killed. Um, but none of us expected what was going to come of it because we thought, oh no, we're splitting the campaign, we're making multiple characters and things. But I've never played a more engaging, more intense campaign in my life than when we decided to um, allow that to play out. Basically, everyone knew what they were doing, they knew their characters, they knew exactly what those people would do if they were real, and I'm really thankful that we let that, go its course. Otherwise, I think we would have missed out on a really, really incredible story.
Right, and so players and GMs should not sort of steer away from these situations, but maybe perhaps, as you suggest, lean into them in such a way that, in this situation, the way that the conflict was resolved was to branch the story, and have everyone create new characters, and then we would follow the one path, which was the sort of anti-magic pathway, and then the sort of pro-magic pathway, and we would, from session to session, follow out these two kind of parallel storylines and how they all would exist within this world.
That's
Um,
fantastic.
before moving on, I did wanted to give listeners some other options on the table. If listeners are unfamiliar with the drama system mechanics that don't require any die rolls at all, instead, there are ways in which conflict can be resolved via a chip pool, as it were, where players all begin with a certain number of chips of various strengths and values, and to which they can simply exert narrative control by passing the chip back to the DM and saying, okay, I've won this combat because I've passed this chip. And of course, slowly over the session's time frame, their chips will begin to diminish, leading them to situations where they will fail, of which point the DM then, by expending the chips that he's been given or that he or she starts with, passes them back to the players or to the communal group, such that when the enemies or foils do something, and therefore it's just like this internal economy of dice rolls, which makes things a little bit less swingy, but indicates that in every session you are going to pass a certain number of checks based on the coins that you have, and you're also going to fail a certain one, and you get the narrative control as a player to indicate when, to some degree, you fail. And it's a very different, but also quite popular system. And then lastly, adding in other elements such as a Jenga tower, famously made in the game Dread, in which anytime a action is made by a character, they pull out a piece from the Jenga tower, placing it on the top, and the failure or character death ensues the moment the Jenga tower collapses to great interest around the table.
That's high drama right there.
Obviously, that will work a lot better in situations when it's a live around the table session rather than online. But
yes.
Virtual Jenga that people can play.
Virtual Jenga. Maybe there is one on Tabletop Simulator or whatnot. But unless anyone else has anything else to add, I think that segment. Let us move on to our third topic. Cue the music.
It's on to our third topic. Theater of the mind, or tactical battle maps. Where does this battle exist? On the table or in the mind?
In the mind.
This is a discussion on the pros and cons of Theater of the Mind and tactical battle maps. Now I know where Jay stands. Certainly in the mind.
Yes.
But it may surprise you that I'm on both sides. And also plus one other as well. Okay. Theater of the Mind, battle maps, and something else called zoned combat. I'll explain it a little bit later, but Jay, as someone who plays Theater of the Mind, what are the benefits of the Theater of the Mind over, say, battle maps?
I tend to use Theater of the Mind for the fact that it unburdens players with the set of rules that come into play when using a tactical battle map. Until, of course, it is necessary to use it. I'm not completely against using tactical battle maps. We've certainly done it in situation where there's a giant war happening and the players are generals commanding units of men on the battlefield. In this case, it's just untenable to do in a theater of the mind. But in that case, we're also not really thinking about hex movement and space and all that kind of stuff. It's more of an abstraction still, but something just to indicate where everything is happening in a situation that is so large that it's difficult to sort of maintain in the headspace. The reason why I steer against battle mats, however, is that I find when they are brought out, the game that is normally happening above the table with people interacting with each other and sort of looking at each other all of a sudden becomes everyone looking at the battle map, everyone is looking at their figurines, everyone is looking at any of the little accoutrements that is drawn on to the battle map in order to indicate what they're going to do narratively, rather than come up with things that may or may not have been in the space that are not indicated on the map, but that they could bring up if it was in a sort of a bar brawl that was happening in the theater of the mind. Thus, they can create new spaces that aren't sort of right in front of them. So I find oftentimes that these beautiful kind of YouTube videos where people have these amazing maps and castle setups and things like that tend to be, for me, something of a fill-in for what they could just be doing in the imaginative realm, and therefore something of a hindrance.
Now I challenge you this.
Riddle me this.
Riddle you this. Confusion. That has been one of the things that I've had in the past, doing sometimes the theater of the mind style, because everyone has a different perception of what the battlefield looks like. And if your description isn't satisfactory enough for everybody, it can lead to, say, misconceptions or even maybe frustration. Placement can be very important. For instance, I've had situations where, you know, like I had a scarab creature that had a different AC for the front and back, and you always have to be aware of where you are on the battlefield or where everyone else is to coordinate attacks like that. I find that sometimes theater of the mind can tend to fights becoming too simple. There are some like puzzles and things like that that you certainly can't do in theater of the mind. Like there was that one situation where you had these pillars, a session that you ran where there were these pillars that had riddles on them, right? And they had to run over to each pillar, and they all had their own different riddle in different places around the map. And eventually, you had to ask me to pretty much draw a map for it, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
So
in
because
in those situations, the map becomes when the visual language becomes too broad to kind of keep track of, then this is where a tactical battle map becomes necessary, I think.
like certainly theater of the mind, I use it all the time, right? It's great for like fast and dynamic battles, off the cuff like encounters and things like that. Some fights that are can be a little bit difficult to map, like if you're going at great speeds or if it's more of a conceptual encounter. And also, of course, like social encounters, I'm not gonna have you go into the market and speak with someone when and have a map for that. There's really no requirement for that. Sandra, do you have any opinions on which do you
I like
prefer?
to kind of go with what the mood of that session is going to be. It, obviously, when you're dealing with a large battle or even like a vast terrain that's going to be part of the element of the encounters, you're going to need to keep everyone grounded. So having these easy to reference markers definitely allows you to be immersed because you're not worrying about tracking so many little details. But what I found that is
Yes.
in groups and campaigns that play with battle maps constantly, you find, at least I found, that people tend to become more rule oriented and they start playing less theater of the mind rather than more. So having kind of a hybrid, to me, really tends to be the right way to do it. Otherwise, I've been in groups where it's people start arguing over just simple mechanics like can my rogue move this many blocks, no, and people get into these strange arguments over movement mechanics rather than staying in the moment and not like in a way nickel and diming each other to a lack of fun. So absolutely, in large battles, please give me all those visual details so that I don't have to track them. But the rest of the time, I feel like they can be a real hindrance to having that free flow of um, of engagement with the players around your table.
I think the use of battle mats and tactical play also indicates a certain level of zoom. Were the rolls to indicate, the outcome of a battle with a single die roll, well, then a battle mat's not necessary. But
Yeah.
when you're getting into the situation of, naval combat, or, what was this, a port side volley of cannon shot, or, a ramming maneuver and what have you, well, now you sort of need that because you're rolling on sort of individual shot by shot basis. So the more zoomed in, for lack of a better word, you are, the more it more necessitates a battle map, perhaps. But to respond to a comment that you made about like the sort of potential frustrations that might arise out of the confusion of situations with theater of the mind, well, I think that could be easily alleviated by simply yes. If a player asks if there's something, is this the situation? Yes, it is the situation, indicating a sense of active combat. Was I close to him? Was I far away from him? Well, you're both. What is the thing that you wanted to do, and now you're close to him because you've moved in. Were you further away from them? Well, you move further away from them. Well, now you are, and it's just there is a rule set, I believe, in a lot of the player handbooks of speaking of active combat, that the players are not just simply standing there waiting for their 6 seconds to swing their sword and bash the goblin over the head with it or whatever, but they're indicating that they're involved in this sort of like dance of melee combat, and therefore they're sort of moving about in a certain space. And I think once you've kind of indicated that that is true, the theater of the mind becomes easier to kind of understand that there is some wiggle room for spatial awareness and where you are and whatnot. And players should also be willing to accept when a DM says, "Well, if you wanted to be a little bit closer, because on the last turn you were a bit closer, you've got to roll for breaking out of combat or running away or whatever the case may be." So these are moments that can be rolls can be made up on the fly to indicate movement allowances or dynamic combat encounters.
Now, I guess we got to go to the other side though. Battle maps. What is a battle map then? The way I see it, there are three kinds of battle maps. There's one that is on the fly, one that you just quickly draw, scratch out onto any kind of paper. It doesn't even need to be the dry erase paper. There's also
to show spatial conditions and
just
what have you.
just to give the players an idea of what that looks like. I'm sure that could be a Microsoft Paint file that you share with everyone, just to give them an idea of where everything is. There's also the kind of like the dry erase mats, or ones that have been planned out, or VTTs also fall into these this category. And also then there are the set pieces, which are like the ones where people have spent days and days crafting a giant bridge that spans the entire table. I've actually never played on one of those. I've seen them, of course, and I've always wanted to try one of those, but it's just, how do you have the space for that?
Well, our Warhammer listeners will know
Absolutely.
how fun it is to play with these
Yes.
figurines and moving on. But
I'm sure. I would love to try it, but I've never actually done it, unfortunately.
yeah, it's very fun, but it indicates it's certain a different game space than if you're just playing in the mind.
It does, and I think we're talking about different types of players as well, right? Because certainly for me, battle maps, they do have some benefits. Like there's certainly a wow factor when you see something amazing, right, or something that's been really well planned out. It can sometimes also promote exploration. People pointing, oh, what's that? What's that over there? One time I had this small little set where they walked into this laboratory, and every single piece in that laboratory, my player was just like, "What's this? What's that?" And we spent the entire session pretty much going through the laboratory, just enjoying what they're finding. Like, "Oh, really? That's a whole bag of Kesaragam dust in here?" Or like, "Oh, what are through all of these like little cabinets?" And oh, it was just incredible. We had so much fun doing that.
Christmas Town? What's this?
What's this? It's magic in the air.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I get it. It seems to go back to this idea of Zoom. If you have a cavernous dungeon in which they need to explore through different doorways, then yes, that really helps to see all the different ways that they can potentially go, and adds to a degree of curiosity rather than simply having three states of I'm near to the entrance, I'm somewhat into the cavern, and I'm deeper into the cavern in like sort of bigger sways of Zoom there.
Complex battles. I love coming up with complex battles. lots of moving parts and things that are actually quite tactical. I once had this kind of like an Ouroboros corridor where the edges of the map would actually lead you to the other side of the map.
Prog rock band, Ouroboros Corridor.
Hey, not bad, not bad. But like that idea of how you could do that in theater of the mind without the limitations of that could be a little bit difficult, I find.
Yes.
Also, I mentioned my scarabs with different ACs for the front and back, right? That was a very dynamic because they had to keep on kind of like kiting them in a certain direction in order for them to be attacked from the front. And yeah, just like ones with like moving parts, like the whole floor tilts constantly, and now you're not facing the bad guy. The bad guy's on the other side now, and that kind of thing. So those kind of things.
The vehicle in which you present the combat situation will certainly indicate the how that combat encounter is sort of designed
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
Also, sorry.
Oh, actually, I have a fun term to throw into this conversation. This is what I warned you guys about earlier. Is that Liberty Gibbet?
Liberty Gibbet.
Flibberty.
Sorry.
Flibberty Gibbet.
Flibberty Gibbet. It's a good term. It's a good term.
Aphantasia. It's a word that you just don't know it yet. It's, I mean,
Spell it.
Aphantas.
No, yeah.
You want it?
Is that it?
No, we
Yes,
always
the wrong
love to celebrate the player who, in your great example, Chris, is going through your laboratory, like finding all the hidden bits, and these are the things that stay with us. Like, we did a good job in creating this scene, this event, this world. But most tables do have that one person who doesn't do that. They're great players. They're the tactical players usually. They're the ones who, in my experience, love to play those melee front end fighters. And what I'd love to see evolve is a conversation with all the players at our table about how well can you picture a scene being given to you verbally in your mind. So aphantasia simply means the inability to conjure a mental image or picture in one's mind. So you encounter this a lot with people who don't read. Not that they're illiterate, but people who don't enjoy picking up a fiction book and just losing themselves for a few hours. They have incredible difficulty picturing what they're reading, so they lose interest. Research has found that a lot of people who have ADHD have a higher incident rate of aphantasia than the population. In fact, tens of millions of people in the world suffer from a severe form of it, to the point that it never gets diagnosed. They never get to experience these things that we take for granted. So when you have a player at your table, and it's all on a spectrum, you can have the complete inability to picture, all the way to you can walk through complete mental images in your mind. A lot of your favorite authors can do exactly that. So if you start a new campaign and you just query the players around your table, how well can you picture this in your mind? That will dictate how much visual representation is really going to draw them into your campaign. So in this particular case, having more images, more battle mats, more minis, any of that is going to draw that player so much further into the campaign than they've ever been. And if the rest of the table who don't necessarily need it to play theater of the mind, they'll just ignore it. But it is definitely a way to level the field for anybody who suffers from this and doesn't even know it.
The use of artifacts as part of the gaming night is certainly something that needs to be explored more. And I think that will be perhaps more for a second look at this very complex and interesting topic.
Hold on. We will have to one day get to my third one of zoned combat, which is kind of like the mix between them. But maybe we'll do that for another time. It's just a very simple concept. It's something that I've seen from a YouTuber named Professor Dungeon Master. I watched quite a bit of like a YouTube DM, GM tips and those kind of things. And it's just an idea. You just almost, it's like a plate. It's like there's 3 sections in this plate. There is melee, range, and out of range. And you can just, put your minis or put whatever your tokens are in either the melee, like I guess the enemies in the center of this, and they're either in the melee, they're ranged, and then out of ranged area, and it just gives a visual representation of where they
Mm.
are, but it gives no other details. It doesn't tell you what the room looks like, or it just allows people to know where they are in this battle, pretty much. And in that case, like spaces away, like the number of squares or feet away really has no bearing. It's just like if you're in melee, you can attack them. If you're not, then you're just like out of range. And I guess maybe for someone that has that,
Aphantasia.
what's it called uh, aphantasia, aphantasia, might be a good
Absolutely.
middle ground in some ways to at least help them.
Yeah, we've done things like that before with the battle in the bridges and the waterfalls, and what have you. And I was indicating it with the dungeons, that you are sort of near to the entrance. You are in the center of the dungeon.
Yep.
You are deep within the dungeon, and you just have space. But then that's that same thing, but kind of like zoomed into a particular combat encounter. Are you melee? Are you ranged? Are you farther than that? And then maybe even one more step where it's like now you fled the combat or something like that once you've removed them from the plate. Or to go back to a hilarious encounter where we were talking about the ways in which Waffle House indicates
Oh, the
Waffle
Waffle
House.
House
I
ordering
don't understand
scheme.
this
No,
reference. But
Waffle House training videos as to how to indicate like what someone has ordered, and you place the ketchup packets in certain ways. Like if you put 2 ketchup packets at the 2 o'clock position, that means they've ordered a
Beautiful
omelet with
madness.
cheese. It's like, why don't you just say omelet with cheese?
Oh,
Oh, it's absolute madness. But yeah.
this.
Well, that's all we got for today. Does anybody have anything to plug or anything coming up in your creative life?
currently I'm under NDA for my project, but outside of that, you can find me on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 5:30 Pacific on Twitch as Lady Von Frost.
Chris, anything going on?
Working on my Rosada kind of like side campaign thing that you can just plug and play into any campaign if you wish. Doing some art, doing some maps, and maybe about like 80 different names related to the region that you can just use for any campaign. So look forward to that eventually.
Link provided in the show notes.
And you, Jay?
Yes, any new games that we have will be on tanukigames.org. Take a look at the link in the show notes. That's all we got for today. See you guys next time.